It started with a mighty swing. Kapow! Wow! Home run over the stadium wall. The crowd went wild. Actually, that crowd was my little sister and my dog. And the stadium was my backyard. But for this scrawny 7-year-old, well, that was a monster hit. And then it hit me, because my ball was now in the middle of scary old Mrs. Fujimoto's flower garden. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, sometimes life's lessons come at an early age, and sometimes from an unlikely source. Scary old Mrs. Fujimoto lived all alone next door, and as I played in the backyard, why, she often stood at her window, silently staring at me, while she never, ever smiled. And I could barely understand her, because she was Japanese. Now you might be thinking, but aren't you Japanese? Well, yes, but I was born here. I had no use for that language. I didn't want to chit-chat. I just wanted my ball back. So I had to face her. On her front porch, I peeked through the screen door, and there she was, at her kitchen table, sitting, silently staring at me. She lifted an arthritic hand. The door creaked. Can I get my ball back from your garden? She lifted her other hand from below the table. She was holding a knife. And it wasn't a butter knife. It looked like a samurai sword. Okay, a miniature one. But it had a shiny steel blade. Well, I was about to run when she did something I really didn't expect. She laughed. A soft, happy laugh. And I saw the reason she never smiled. She didn't have any teeth. She quickly covered her mouth, but her eyes continued to smile. And that's when I realized scary old Mrs. Fujimoto was not so scary after all. On the table in front of her was a pile of chrysanthemums. Next to her on the floor were a few more. And there were a couple that were sticking out of a big bowl of small stones. She was making one of her famous flower arrangements. I remember my parents telling me that she made the best and that they would be her legacy. But I couldn't take my eyes off that sword. Oh, what you doing? And without saying a word, she started to hum. And with a swift, fluid motion, she sliced a few inches from the ends of those flower stems, each time either inserting it into the bowl of stones or discarding it to the floor. Oh, what's wrong with those? She stopped humming and pulled one of the flowers from her arrangement. And in her best version of my English, perfect is no perfect. Well, I looked at those flowers on the floor, but I could see no difference between those cuts and her perfect one. And even so, I thought, well, wouldn't the ends just end up covered in those rocks? But well, why are those not good enough? No one can see the ends anyway. And she looked at me with those smiling eyes. No one see, I see my perfect. She handed me one of those flowers, and I went home, forgetting all about my ball. But over that summer, I made friends with Mrs. Fujimoto, and she taught me about those flower arrangements and how she cut the flowers at a perfectly clean 30 degrees with no frays or no splits, or she wouldn't include them in her arrangements. Because for her, even the unseen had to be perfect. And that choice made it her signature buried in those stones. A few years later, my father walked into my bedroom and caught me struggling with my necktie. He reached in to help. No, Dad, I'll do it. I have to do it myself. I was getting dressed to say goodbye to Mrs. Fujimoto for the final time. I tied it and untied it. I retied it and untied it. I looked up at the old dried chrysanthemum that was still hanging from my bedroom mirror. I tied it again. Somewhere, Mrs. Fujimoto's eyes were smiling. And over my lifetime, there have been many times when I've had to choose between good enough or perfect. And each time in my mind, I simply return to Mrs. Fujimoto's kitchen for my answer. You see, ladies and gentlemen, we often make choices dependent upon if anyone else would know. Choosing for the approval of others, or even compromising our choices when the only approval is our own. I choose for me. Because our choices become our signatures and showcase who we are. Think of that when you choose. And remember the lesson of scary old, friendly old Mrs. Fujimoto. That our greatest signatures, the ones that will define our legacy, will often be the ones that no one else will ever see.